You have spent today manifesting, not during meditation, not during a visualization session, not while repeating affirmations or scripting in your journal. You manifested while standing in line at the grocery store, running a conversation in your head about a bill you're worried about. You manifested while driving home, imagining an argument with someone who hasn't said what you rehearsed yet. You manifested while lying in bed last night, scrolling through worst-case scenarios for a situation that hasn't happened, feeling the dread in your stomach, the tightness in your chest, the quiet certainty that things would go wrong. Every one of those moments was a creative act. You constructed a scene, you entered it, you felt it as real. And the subconscious mind, which cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a physical one, received each of those moments as an instruction and began building accordingly. You already know how to manifest like you already have something. You've been doing it your entire life. The problem is that the something you've been manifesting from is fear, lack, and expectation of the worst. And you've been doing it so naturally, so effortlessly, so automatically that you never recognized the process for what it was. Neville Goddard spent decades teaching people to take that exact same process, the one you're already running on autopilot, and aim it deliberately, not at what you're afraid of, at what you want. Using the same faculty, the same mechanism, and the same feeling of reality you already generate involuntarily every single day. Today I'm going to show you the 7 sequential steps Neville taught for manifesting from the state of already having, not as abstract philosophy, but as a concrete nightly practice you can begin tonight, and why each step matters mechanically at the level of the subconscious mind. Step 1. Choose the end, not the root. This is where most people begin their manifestation practice wrong, and the error compounds through every step that follows. When you decide what you want to manifest, your mind immediately starts constructing scenarios about how it will arrive. You imagine the job interview. You imagine the business deal closing. You imagine the person you're interested in calling you back. You're imagining the bridge, the sequence of events between where you are now and where you want to be. And Neville said this was fundamentally backwards. When you imagine the bridge, you restrict the mechanism to the single path your conscious mind could conceive. And your conscious mind, as creative as it thinks it is, has access to a fraction of the possibilities available. The subconscious mind operates with access to connections, timing, and arrangements your waking awareness cannot fathom. Neville observed in student after student that when they prescribed the method of delivery, manifestation either stalled completely or arrived through the prescribed route in a diminished form. When they prescribed only the end, the subconscious constructed bridges so elegant and unexpected that the students couldn't have imagined them in advance. So step 1 is choosing the end and only the end. Not, I get the job at that company. The feeling of already working there when it's routine. Not, she calls me back. The quiet Saturday morning 3 months into the relationship when it's just your normal life. Not, the money arrives. The settled experience of already having the financial security you want, long after the novelty is worn off. You're choosing a destination without drawing the map. The mechanism draws its own map. Your only job is to be absolutely clear about where you're going while remaining completely indifferent to how you get there. Step 2. Construct a single scene that proves it's already done. Neville didn't teach people to visualize long, elaborate movies of their desired life. He taught them to build one short scene, 5 seconds, maybe 10, that could only be happening if the wish were already fulfilled. Not a scene of receiving, a scene of having received. The difference is everything. A scene of receiving is still a future event. You're opening the letter, hearing the news, seeing the number in the account for the first time. There's surprise in that scene, excitement, novelty, and all of those emotions signal to the subconscious that this is something new, something that hasn't happened yet. But a scene of having received is a scene from after, a scene where the thing is already old news, where you're living inside the result so completely that the result itself is no longer interesting. Think about what this looks like practically. If your desire is a new home, the scene isn't walking through the door for the first time. It's standing at the kitchen sink 3 months later, washing a glass, Looking out a window, you've looked out 100 times. If your desire is a specific amount of money, the scene isn't checking the account and gasping. It's a moment weeks later when you make an ordinary purchase without even thinking about whether you can afford it. If your desire is a relationship, the scene isn't the first kiss. It's the unremarkable Wednesday evening when you're sitting together in comfortable silence because this is just your life now. The scene should be short enough to loop, specific enough to feel real, and boring enough that it could only belong to someone who already has what you want. That boring quality is the proof, because unfulfilled desires are exciting, fulfilled realities are ordinary, and ordinary is the signal the subconscious reads as real. Step 3. Enter the scene from inside, not from outside. Neville considered this the technical instruction most people skip, and he returned to it with an urgency that suggests he watched hundreds of students get everything else right and still fail because of this one error. When most people visualize, they watch themselves in the scene. They see their own face, their own body from a distance, like watching a character in a movie who happens to look like them. And Neville said this produces the experience of watching, not the experience of having. The subconscious registers what you're actually experiencing. And if you're experiencing observation, watching someone else live your life from across the room, that's what gets built. More watching, more being on the outside of what you want. Every real experience you've ever had was first person. You've never seen your own face while living a moment. You see through your eyes. You feel with your hands. You hear sounds arriving at your ears. So when you enter your constructed scene, you must be inside it, looking through your own eyes at the view from that kitchen window, feeling the glass in your hand as you wash it, hearing the sound of water, feeling the floor beneath your feet. If another person is in your scene, you see them the way you see people in life, from your perspective, not from above or across the room. This shift from third person to first person is the difference between a daydream and an impression. A daydream entertains the conscious mind. An impression programs the subconscious. And programming is what you're here to do. Step 4. Saturate the scene with the feeling of already having. This is the step that separates Neville's teaching from every visualization technique in the self-development space. It's also the step that most people misunderstand so completely that their practice produces the opposite of what they intend. When people hear, add feeling to your visualization, they do what feels natural. They generate excitement. They pump up enthusiasm. They try to feel the thrill of getting what they want. And Neville would say that every ounce of excitement you generate about your desire is a signal broadcasting that you don't have it yet. Because excitement is the emotional signature of something unfamiliar, something new, something you don't yet possess. You don't feel excited about your own heartbeat. You don't feel thrilled about your current phone. You feel nothing about these things because they're already real. They're already yours. And that nothing is exactly what Neville was pointing to. The feeling he described wasn't an emotion. It was a state. The inner atmosphere of someone whose wish is already a settled, ordinary part of their life. It's calm. It's unremarkable. It carries the same quality as knowing your own address. No doubt, no excitement, no hope. Just quiet, factual certainty that this is how things are. When you're inside your constructed scene and the feeling shifts from, I'm imagining something exciting to, I'm just here in my life, and this is normal. That's the feeling Neville meant. It's not a peak, it's a plateau, and the subconscious reads plateaus as reality. Neville observed that the students who struggled with this were invariably the ones chasing emotional intensity. They wanted manifestation to feel dramatic, and it doesn't. It feels like coming home and putting your keys on the counter. It feels like already being where you want to be and having nothing to say about it. That flatness, that emotional quietness, is the most powerful creative signal a human being can generate, because it is identical to how reality actually feels. Step 5. Enter the drowsy state and loop the scene until you fall asleep inside it. Neville considered this the delivery mechanism. the specific channel through which your conscious construction reaches the subconscious mind. During full waking consciousness, your analytical mind acts as a gatekeeper. It evaluates everything. You imagine your scene and the conscious mind whispers, "That's not real." You generate the feeling of having, and something in you flinches because your bank account, your relationship status, or your circumstances contradict the assumption. That flinch is the gatekeeper rejecting the impression before it reaches the subconscious. But in the drowsy state, those moments between wakefulness and sleep when your body is heavy, your thoughts are softening, and your grip on the external world is loosening, the gatekeeper steps aside. Your critical faculty diminishes. The door between the conscious and subconscious minds opens, and whatever you hold in imagination during this window sinks directly into the subconscious without being intercepted, evaluated, or rejected. This is why Neville's core instruction centered on bedtime. Not morning meditation, not midday visualization, the moments before sleep. You lie down. You relax your body deliberately. You feel yourself drifting. And in that drift, that liminal space where the world gets soft, you bring your scene forward. You enter it in first person. You loop it. You feel the settled ordinariness of having. And you let yourself fall asleep inside it. Falling asleep inside the scene is not optional in Neville's framework. It's the mechanism by which the impression bypasses the gatekeeper completely. When you fall asleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the last impression received by the subconscious, the instruction it carries through the night, processes, and begins building from, is the assumption that your wish is already real, not hoped for, not desired, already part of your life. Most people invert this completely. They spend the drowsy state, the most powerful programming window they have access to, worrying about tomorrow, replaying today's problems, or consuming content that generates anxiety. They're using the open door to impress the subconscious with fear every single night, and they wake up wondering why their life feels like a reflection of their fears rather than their desires. It is, precisely, because of what they fall asleep inside. Step 6. Carry the assumption through the waking day. Neville was honest that the nightly imaginal act is the easier part, the harder part, the part that determines whether your manifestation actually solidifies, is what happens when you open your eyes the next morning and the physical world hasn't changed yet. Your bank account still reads the same number. The relationship hasn't appeared, the job offer hasn't arrived, and in the gap between what you assumed last night and what you see this morning, your habitual imagination rushes in to fill the space with its default programming. You check your account and feel the familiar stomach drop of lack. You look at your phone and feel the familiar ache of loneliness. You sit in traffic and run the familiar inner conversation about how nothing ever works for you. Every one of these moments is a counter-impression. Everyone contradicts the assumption you planted last night. And if you spend 10 minutes planting the wish fulfilled and 16 hours reinforcing the wish unfulfilled, the subconscious responds to the dominant impression. The math doesn't work in your favor. This is why Neville said the real work of manifestation isn't the nightly session. It's the daytime discipline of catching yourself every time your imagination runs a scene that contradicts your assumed state. Not fighting the contradictory thought. Not punishing yourself for having it. Simply noticing it, declining to continue it, and briefly returning to the feeling of your scene, the calm, the ordinariness, the settled certainty. You don't need to re-enter the full scene every time. You just need to touch the feeling, like pressing your thumb against a touchstone, and let that feeling reassert itself as the dominant signal. Neville compared this to walking a new path through a field. The first time you walk it, the grass barely bends. The 10th time, a faint trail forms. The 100th time, the path is worn and clear. Your old assumptions have been walked thousands of times. The path is deep. The new assumption is a single pass through fresh grass. It takes repetition, not desperate repetition, but calm, persistent repetition, to wear the new path deeper than the old one. And every time you redirect a contradictory inner conversation back to the feeling of having, you're walking the new path again. Step 7. Persist until the assumption hardens into fact. Neville stated this as a law, not a suggestion. An assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. The hardening isn't instant for most people, not because the mechanism is slow, but because most people aren't truly persisting. They're oscillating. They assume their wish fulfilled at night, then assume it unfulfilled all day. They persist for a week, get discouraged by the unchanged physical world, and abandon the state. They mistake the absence of immediate physical evidence for the absence of the mechanism working. And they quit right at the point where the subconscious was beginning to accept the new blueprint. Neville observed a pattern in his students that he described repeatedly. There comes a moment, different for each person, impossible to predict, impossible to force, when the assumption shifts from something you're consciously holding to something you simply are. It stops being a practice and starts being an identity. You no longer need to remind yourself to feel the wish fulfilled because that's just how you feel. The settled certainty isn't an exercise anymore. It's your default state. And when that shift happens, when the assumption moves from the conscious mind into the subconscious as an accepted fact, the physical world begins reorganizing with a speed that looks like coincidence to anyone who doesn't understand the mechanism. People appear, opportunities materialize, doors open that you didn't know existed, not through magic. Through the bridge of incidents, a series of perfectly natural, perfectly ordinary events that connect where you were to where your assumption says you should be. Each event on the bridge looks unremarkable on its own. A conversation, an introduction, a seemingly random decision. But strung together, they form a path so precise it could only have been constructed by a mechanism that knew the destination and worked backwards to find the route. The only thing that can stop this process is you leaving the state before the bridge completes. And the most common way people leave the state is by panicking when the bridge doesn't look the way they expected. Sometimes the bridge includes events that seem like the opposite of your desire. A job loss that precedes a better career. A relationship ending that creates space for the one you actually assumed. A financial setback that forces the exact decision that generates new wealth. If you react to these bridge events by abandoning your assumption and returning to the old state, you collapse the bridge midway. You have to trust the mechanism enough to stay in the room while the hallway between you and your physical result is still being built. Persistence doesn't mean white-knuckled effort. It means quiet refusal to leave the state you've chosen. Night after night, entering the scene, feeling it real, falling asleep inside it. Day after day, redirecting contradictory imagination back to the assumption. Not with desperation, with the calm, unhurried patience of someone who already knows the outcome. Because that patience, that willingness to let the physical world catch up to what's already true in consciousness, is itself a quality of the state of having. People who already have what they want aren't in a hurry to get it. They just live in it. And that living is what you're learning to do. These 7 steps are not 7 separate techniques. They are one continuous act of creation. A single gesture of consciousness that begins with choosing the end, crystallizes into a specific sensory scene, enters the scene from within, saturates it with the feeling of already having, delivers it to the subconscious through the drowsy state, maintains the assumption throughout the day, and persists until the subconscious accepts the new blueprint and builds accordingly. Neville taught this sequence to thousands of people across 3 decades. The students who applied it reported shifts that ranged from quiet and gradual to sudden and dramatic. But the mechanism was always the same. They assumed a state. They occupied it consistently, and physical reality reorganized to match. Not because they vibrated higher, not because the universe rewarded their effort, because the subconscious mind builds from whatever it accepts as true, and they had impressed a new truth with enough clarity and persistence that the subconscious had no choice but to execute it. The confronting part of this framework is its simplicity. There is nothing to buy, nothing to earn, nothing external to align with. The entire mechanism is inside you, the same faculty you use today to rehearse a conversation you're dreading, The same vivid, first-person, emotionally saturated imagination that made your body respond as if the conversation were actually happening is the exact faculty Neville says builds your physical reality. You've been using it masterfully your whole life. You just haven't been choosing what you build with it. Neville would tell you that what you do tonight matters more than anything you did today. Because tonight, in the moments before sleep, you have a choice that most people never realize they're making. You can fall asleep inside the same fears, the same worries, the same habitual rehearsals of worst-case scenarios that have been building the life you're trying to escape. Or you can construct a scene so real you feel the floor beneath your feet, so ordinary it could be any Tuesday, so settled that there's nothing left to want, and fall asleep inside that instead. One scene, one feeling, repeated nightly and maintained daily, compounding, deepening, until the morning arrives when you open your eyes and the world outside finally matches the one you've been living in. Not because reality changed, because you changed first. And reality, which has been following your lead since the day you were born, simply did what it has always done.